Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're proving something I think is really crucial. That, real history often hides, not in the big headlines, but in the everyday details of ordinary people's lives.
Mm.
We're doing a deep dive into one specific life. Norman Seaver lives 1734 to 1787 in Massachusetts.
And the sources, well, they're about as unglamorous as you can get. We're talking dense genealogical sketches, probate court dockets, land deeds, vital records,
Yeah.
real bureaucratic stuff.
Exactly. But our mission is to take these, frankly, dry records,
Yeah.
the acres, the shillings, the dates, and stitch together the life of this one man. A soldier, father, carpenter, even a bit of a land speculator.
Right, and it's amazing how these technical documents, when you treat them like clues, let you track not just where he was, but how he actually built his life, his wealth, his standing over decades.
And it all builds towards this really dramatic end. Here's a guy, a successful carpenter, an officer in the Revolution, and his life is cut short by a fall from his own project.
A tragic irony, really.
That's the life we're piecing together. So let's dive in. Where do we start? Well, like a lot of history from this period, there's a bit of fuzziness right at the beginning with the Seaver family.
Yeah, that's right. The records aren't always perfect. His birth year, for instance, it's listed as either 1734 or 1735.
And the place, too. Framingham or Sudbury.
Exactly. We know he was the fourth kid of Robert and Eunice Seaver. Her maiden name was Raymond.
And there's that interesting correction needed right off the bat in the secondary sources, the genealogies.
Oh, yeah, that's a great example. Both Cutter and Haywood, the genealogists, they incorrectly name his wife Sarah Reed's father as Jacob.
For the primary records, the deeds and vital records, they clearly show it was Isaac Reed.
It just underscores, you always have to double check against the original documents. Secondary sources can have errors.
Absolutely. So pulling back a bit, what defines Norman Seaver's life trajectory?
Movement. Definitely movement. He's essentially following the settlement pattern of central Massachusetts, a bit of a pioneer.
He really gets around. First pops up in the records in 1751. He's working for the proprietors of a place called Narragansett No. 2.
Which later becomes Westminster.
Right. Then he's back in Sudbury for a bit, then lives over in Shrewsbury, before finally, in 1773, making that decisive move back to Westminster. That's when he buys lots 76 and 122.
And that kind of mobility, well, it was key if you were ambitious back then. Land was opening up, and that's where the opportunity was.
And while he's moving, his family's getting bigger.
Oh, absolutely. He marries Sarah Reed, Isaac Reed's daughter, back in Sudbury in 1755.
And they have, 13 children?
13 kids between 1755 and 1780, and remarkably, all but one, a son named Joseph. They all live to be adults.
Wow. Just imagine the logistics. Moving a family that large across Massachusetts in the 1760s and 70s.
You can actually map their journey using the kids' birthplaces. It's pretty neat. The first 3 were born in Sudbury.
Okay.
Then the next 6 show up in the Shrewsbury records.
Right.
And then the last 4 are born after they made that final move to Westminster.
That's fascinating. The family's vital records basically become this paper trail showing their 25 years search for a permanent home base?
Exactly. It shows the real effort involved in climbing that ladder, becoming a landholder.
Speaking of climbing, let's talk about his economic life. Because the way he's described in legal documents, that tells a story in itself.
It really does. You see this clear progression. In 1760, there's a deed where he buys 100 acres in Shrewsbury. Costs him 120 pounds.
And how's he listed there?
As a husbandman of Sudbury.
Husbandman, so like a small farmer, working the land mainly for his own family.
Pretty much. Subsistence level or close to it.
Yeah.
But he doesn't stay a husbandman for long. He's buying and selling land pretty actively.
Including that bigger parcel in Westminster in 1773, the 127 acres that confirms his move.
Right. And by then, his title in the documents shifts. He starts being called yeoman.
Yeoman. Okay, what's the significance of that jump?
It's a big step up in status. A yeoman is a freeholder. He owns a decent amount of land, works it, but likely has enough stability, maybe even employs others, participates in town affairs. It signals financial security, independence.
Okay, so husbandman to yeoman. And
Then, by the time he dies in 1787, the probate documents list him as gentleman.
gentleman. That's quite the climb. That's basically the top tier in colonial society. Unless you were born into serious wealth or aristocracy, right?
Exactly. It implies he'd reached a point where he wasn't necessarily doing the manual labor himself day in, day out. He had accumulated enough wealth, perhaps from his land or his trade.
And we know his trade was carpentry.
Yes, explicitly. That seems to have been his primary profession alongside the land dealings.
And you see that status reflected in other community records too, like the church seating.
Oh, absolutely. He owned pew number 2 on the lower floor of the second meeting house in Westminster, prime real estate, spiritually speaking.
And those weren't just assigned, right? You had to buy them.
You did. And they weren't cheap. Somewhere between $31 and $66, which was a significant sum then. Owning a good pew like that was a very public statement of your standing and your contribution to the town.
So he's building this life, achieving success, becoming a respected figure, a classic colonial story in many ways. But then comes the massive disruption, the Revolutionary War. How does this established yeoman, this carpenter, react?
He jumps right in. His service is clearly documented in the muster rolls. You can see his progression.
Starts right at the beginning, doesn't he? April 1775, the Lexington Alarm.
Yep. Listed as sergeant in Captain Noah Miles's company, marched out immediately, served 11 and a half days right at the start.
So boots on the ground from day one, and he moves up from there.
He does. By 1777, he's commissioned as an ensign. That's in Colonel Danforth Keyes' regiment. Saw service down in Providence.
Okay, ensign.
Then he achieves the rank of first lieutenant. That was in Colonel Nathaniel Way's regiment. He signed on for a pretty long stretch, April 1778 through early 1779.
Where was he serving then?
Rhode Island campaign. The records place him at muster rolls in North Kingston and East Greenwich during that time.
So definitely involved in major campaigns, not just local militia duty.
Right. He saw significant service. Now, it's worth noting, his gravestone and his death record call him captain.
Ah, okay. So was he promoted again later?
It's more likely that captain was an honorific title. Maybe a brevet rank given after the war, or perhaps recognition from the local militia later on, acknowledging his service and status in town. His documented active rank during the war peaked at first lieutenant.
That makes sense. And it wasn't just him, was it? This was sort of a family affair.
Very much so. His brothers, Moses and Samuel, they also served. And get this, 3 of his own sons served too. Benjamin, Joseph, and Isaac.
Wow. That's a serious family commitment to the patriot cause. Really shows you the depth of feeling and, well, duty in families like the Seavers.
Absolutely.
Okay, so he comes through the war, presumably returns to Westminster, continues his trade, his life as a gentleman carpenter, which brings us to the end.
And it's very sudden and deeply tied to his profession. This is where the story takes that tragic turn.
He had the contract for the second meeting house, right?
Yeah.
The same one where he owned pew number 2.
Exactly. He was responsible for enclosing it, shingling it, a major project. And on July 31st, 1787, they were doing the raising.
Lifting the main timber frame into place.
That's precisely. A dangerous, critical phase in construction back there. And somehow, during that raising, Norman Seaver fell.
Oh, no.
The records say he received fatal injuries, died almost immediately. He was only in his 53rd year.
Killed by his own craft, working on the town's central building. The irony is just palpable.
It really is. And because it was so sudden, so unexpected, he died intestate.
Meaning no will.
No will, which immediately threw his family into the legal process of probate court in Worcester County.
And those probate records, they give us that final financial snapshot, confirming his gentleman's status.
They do. The inventory lists his real estate. The home lot was 106 acres, plus buildings valued at 215 pounds. And his personal estate tools, livestock, furniture, all that came in at another, 159 niners, 19 shillings, 9 pence.
So by the standards of Massachusetts, just after the war, he was comfortably well off. A successful man.
Definitely. He'd done well for himself and his family.
Now, the distribution of that estate, ordered a few years later in 1792, that's where you see the legal mechanics of the time really clearly. His widow, Sarah.
Right. Sarah received her dower right. That was standard legal protection for widows.
Which meant what exactly in practice?
It meant she got the legal right to use 1/3 of the real estate for the rest of her life. It didn't mean she owned it outright, but she had the income and security from it. Absolutely crucial.
Okay, that makes sense. But then the division among the children, especially with so many, that gets interesting. The eldest son, Benjamin.
Yes, Benjamin Seaver received a double portion of the real estate.
Double portion. Why? Was that standard practice?
It was a very common practice rooted in English tradition. Giving the eldest son a double share wasn't just about playing favorites. The idea was to keep the main family property, the farm or business, largely intact and economically viable. Benjamin, as the new male head of household in that sense, got the larger share to manage the core assets.
But he couldn't just keep it all, right? What about the other 11 surviving siblings?
No, absolutely not. There was a balancing act. Benjamin received the bulk of the land, the double portion, plus his own share of the remaining two-thirds. But, and this is key, he was legally obligated to pay out his siblings their shares in cash.
Ah.
The court ordered him to pay each of the other children £11. So their inheritance was essentially converted to cash, paid by the son who kept the land. It preserved the estate while ensuring, some level of fairness.
It's a really pragmatic solution, trying to balance tradition, economics, and fairness. And the probate records also highlight the immediate problem caused by his sudden death, the younger children.
Yes, that's another layer. Sarah, the widow, was appointed administratrix of the estate, managing the whole process. But 4 of their children were still minors under the law.
So they needed legal guardians.
Correct. Guardians had to be formally appointed by the court. Sarah herself was appointed guardian for 2 of them, Fev and Lucendon.
Okay.
And another man from the community, Samuel Garish, was appointed guardian for the other 2 minors, Asel and Relief Seaver.
It just shows the immediate, practical, legal chaos that a sudden death like that could cause for a large family.
Right.
The fragility is really apparent.
Absolutely. The patriarch's suddenly gone, and the legal system has to step in immediately to protect the children's interests.
So when we step back from all these details, the deeds, the ranks, the probate orders, what's the big picture of Norman Seaver that emerges?
Well, it's clear he's much more than just a name etched on a gravestone in Westminster. We've managed to piece together this narrative of a man whose life really mirrors the growth, the challenges, the whole transformation of Massachusetts in his time.
Right. From a humble husbandman moving around to a respected yeoman, a property owner, a tradesman, and finally, a gentleman.
And a dedicated soldier who rose through the ranks during the Revolution. He moved from being a colonial subject to a citizen of the new republic, and his life reflects that entire arc.
And we know the specific, almost poetic tragedy of his end, working on the town's meeting house, killed by a fall.
Yeah.
It makes the history so much more tangible, doesn't it? It takes it beyond dates and facts.
It absolutely does. It turns those dry records in Woodside Cemetery into a vivid story of ambition, family-building service, and ultimately that sudden frontier-era danger.
It really drives home that history is made up of these individual lives, their economic struggles, their physical work, sometimes the sheer accidents that shape families.
Couldn't agree more.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something to think about. Consider the human story tucked away inside that formal probate language. It's 1787, only 10 years after the war's peak intensity. Sarah Seaver is suddenly a widow. She's the administratrix of a substantial but complex estate. She has 12 children still alive, 4 of them young enough to need court-appointed guardians, all because her successful husband had a fatal accident on the job.
Yeah.
Just try to imagine the immense pressure on her, the grief, the legal burdens, the financial responsibility of keeping that gentleman status afloat, managing the farm, the assets, while raising that huge family alone. That's the reality hidden behind the records.